The rain that night did not fall. It threw itself against the rusted corrugated sheets of the small rented apartment like a desperate entity trying to break inside. Inside, 10-year-old Leo sat on a wooden stool that rocked on the uneven concrete floor, his arms wrapped tightly around his 7-year-old sister, Clara. They both stared at the center of the room, where their world was quietly, violently splintering. "I didn't sign up for this, Julian." Evelyn's voice was sharp, cutting through the heavy humidity of the room. She was throwing clothes into a worn canvas bag, her movements frantic and devoid of hesitation. "Look at this place. Look at what you've reduced us to." Julian, his husband, stood near the door, his posture broken. Just 3 months prior, he had been a respected senior supervisor at the local manufacturing plant, a man who walked with his head high, bringing home a steady paycheck that kept his family fed, clothed, and secure. But a sudden corporate liquidation had swept his livelihood away overnight. In a flash, he was just another unemployed man in a city overflowing with them. "Evelyn, please," Julian begged, his hands extended, palms up, in a gesture of utter vulnerability. "It's a temporary setback. I am looking for work every single day. I've been to 10 different sites this week alone. Just give me a little time. We are a family. Family doesn't starve together out of loyalty," she snapped, zipping the bag with a harsh, definitive screech. "I am a woman who deserves to be taken care of. I cannot continue struggling with a man who can't even provide a decent meal for his children, let alone me. I'm leaving." "What about Leo? What about Clara?" Julian's voice cracked, his eyes darting toward the corner where the 2 children clung to each other. Evelyn didn't look at them. She couldn't. "They are your children. You figure it out. Besides, Marcus is waiting downstairs. He actually has a future." Marcus was a local merchant, a man of means who had been hovering around the edges of their neighborhood, flaunting his wealth. The realization that his wife had already aligned herself with another man hit Julian like a physical blow. He staggered back against the doorframe. Without another word, Evelyn hoisted the bag onto her shoulder, pushed past her husband, and walked out into the pouring rain. She never looked back. Not at the man she had promised to stand by in sickness and in health, and not at the 2 children whose hearts she had just irrevocably shattered. Leo felt Clara's tears soaking through his thin shirt. He tightened his grip on her small shoulders. At 10 years old, a sudden, heavy mantle of responsibility settled upon his young frame. He looked at his father, who had collapsed onto his knees, weeping silently into his hands. Leo closed his eyes and made a silent vow. He would protect his sister, and he would help his father rebuild whatever was left of their lives. The years that followed were an unyielding masterclass in survival. Deep poverty is not just the absence of money. It is a constant, ambient noise of anxiety, an ongoing calculation of pennies, and the bitter taste of stale bread. Julian did not let his despair destroy him. For the sake of his children, he took any job available. He pushed heavy wheelbarrows at construction sites, swept the central market stalls at dawn, and carried sacks of cement until his back was permanently bowed and his hands were thick with calluses. No matter how exhausted he was, his priority remained unchanged. Leo and Clara had to go to school. "Education is your way out of this dust," Julian would whisper to them at night, his voice hoarse from the dust of the day's labor. "As long as I have breath in my lungs, you 2 will sit in a classroom." Leo proved to be exceptionally brilliant. He possessed an innate, profound understanding of logic and systems. While other children played, Leo would sit under the street lamp with discarded electronics, dismantling them and putting them back together, or solving complex mathematical equations in old newspapers he found in the trash. His teachers openly marveled at his intellect, whispering that he was a prodigy destined for great universities. However, reality has a cruel way of reshaping destiny. By the time Leo graduated from high school at the top of his class, Julian's health was failing. Years of brutal, manual labor had taken a severe toll on his body. He developed a chronic respiratory condition and severe arthritis that made it impossible for him to work the long hours required to keep the family afloat. Clara was entering her final years of secondary school, her eyes set on an ambitious, almost impossible dream. She wanted to be a medical doctor. One evening, after Clara had gone to sleep, Leo sat with his father at the small kitchen table. The single light bulb overhead flickered weakly. "Father," Leo said softly, placing his hand over Julian's rough, swollen knuckles. I am not going to college. Julian's eyes widened in shock, and he tried to protest. No, Leo. You are the brightest mind this town has seen. Your teachers said. My teachers don't pay our rent, Father. Leo interrupted gently, his voice resolute. And they don't buy Clara's textbooks. If I go to the university, who will support you? Who will pay for Clara's tuition? We cannot afford to dream 2 dreams at once. Let us fund Clara's dream. She wants to save lives. Let me help her do that. After that conversation, Julian wept that night, a father's tears of profound gratitude mixed with the crushing guilt of a man who felt he had failed his firstborn. But Leo held no resentment. He knew exactly what he was doing. The next morning, Leo began his hustle. He took on multiple jobs. He worked at a local cyber cafe by day, teaching himself advanced programming and network architecture during the quiet hours when customers were few. By night, he worked loading crates at the docks. Every single penny he earned was split into 2 portions, one for their meager daily sustenance and his father's medications, and the other, larger portion, tucked away safely into a wooden box for Clara's university fund. For 6 long years, Leo ground his youth into the dirt so his sister could soar. He wore clothes with frayed hems and shoes with holes in the soles. But whenever Clara needed a medical textbook, an expensive stethoscope, or tuition fees, the money was always there. You are giving up too much for me, Leo, Clara would often cry, holding a heavy volume on human anatomy that her brother had just bought her. Leo would smile, his eyes filled with a deep, protective affection. I'm not giving up anything, Clara. I am investing in our family's savior. Just study hard. Become the doctor we know you can be. Clara did not squander her brother's sacrifice. She studied with a fierce, desperate intensity, driven by the knowledge that every page she turned was paid for by the sweat of her brother's brow and the ache in her father's bones. When she graduated from medical school, she did so at the very top of her class, earning accolades and the deep respect of the university faculty. On her graduation day, a momentous announcement was made. Due to her extraordinary academic record and clinical excellence, the university's prestigious teaching hospital offered her an automatic, immediate employment contract as a resident physician. When Clara walked out of the auditorium holding her degree, she didn't look for the professors or her peers. She ran straight toward the 2 men standing at the back of the hall. Julian, dressed in the only decent suit Leo had bought for him, was weeping openly. Leo, his face lined with the premature wrinkles of a decade of hard labor, stood with a proud, radiant smile. Clara threw her arms around them both. We made it, she sobbed. We finally made it. With Clara's steady income as a medical doctor, the heavy cloud of poverty that had hung over the family for nearly 2 decades began to dissipate. The change was swift and profound. First, Clara rented a beautiful, spacious bungalow in a quiet, green suburb, moving her family out of the cramped, damp rooms of their past. She hired a private consultant to treat her father's chronic ailments, finally giving Julian the medical care and comfort he so deeply deserved. She set him up with a comfortable, low-stress retail business, a small boutique electronics and appliance store that kept him engaged without straining his fragile health. Then, she turned her attention to Leo. It's your turn now, big brother, she said one evening, handing him a high-end, top-tier developer laptop and a receipt for an elite, internationally recognized cybersecurity certification program. Clara, this is too expensive, Leo stammered, tracing the sleek lines of the machine. Do not even start, Clara said, pointing a finger at him with mock sternness, though her eyes were shining. You gave up your youth, your education, and your comfort so I could wear this white coat. You taught yourself coding in a dusty cyber cafe. Now, I am financing your dream. You are going to become the cybersecurity expert you were always meant to be. Leo looked at her sister in what seemed like a lifetime moment. Then, he pulled her into a warm embrace. As expected, Leo plunged into his studies with the same brilliance he had possessed as a boy, but now he had the resources, the time, and the peace of mind to truly excel. Within a few short years, he obtained his advanced certifications and landed a high-paying role as a senior cybersecurity consultant for a major financial institution. Gradually, the life they had always dreamed of, the one that had seemed like a distant, cruel mirage during the nights of cold tea and stale bread, became their reality. They had a beautiful home, financial security, mutual respect, and above all, an unbreakable bond forged in the fires of shared tribulation. They were happy. The past was a scar, fully healed, until an unexpected emergency ripped it wide open. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and the emergency ward of the teaching hospital was bustling with its usual chaotic energy. Clara moved through the corridors with a calm, assured grace. Now an experienced resident trusted with complex cases, she was known for her immense empathy, her unyielding professionalism, and her enthusiasm for saving lives. To Clara, every patient was someone's father, someone's sibling, or someone's loved one. Her pager buzzed sharply. It was an emergency page from the triage unit. "Dr. Clara, we have a critical admission," a nurse said hurriedly as Clara arrived at the desk. A female patient, mid-50s. Severe acute abdominal crisis. Suspected perforated peptic ulcer with early signs of septic shock. She needs an urgent laparotomy. The attending surgeon has cleared her for immediate theater, but we need you to stabilize her and complete the pre-op evaluation. "Got it," Clara said, grabbing the patient's chart. "Is the family aware? Have they consented?" "The family is outside, but doctor, they are completely broke," the nurse whispered, leaning in. "They don't even have the deposit for the surgical packs, let alone the procedural fees. The woman is in immense pain, but her family are just panicking in the waiting area because they can't pay. We worry about life first, and the bills later," Clara said firmly, her professional code overriding any bureaucratic financial constraints. "Will her into examination room 3. I'll evaluate her immediately." After a few minutes, Clara pushed open the door to room 3, her mind running through the surgical protocols. The patient on the gurney was groaning, her body curled into a tight fetal position, clutching her abdomen. Her face was pale, glistening with cold sweat, and lined with the deep, harsh marks of a difficult life. Clara stepped up to the bedside. "Hello, I am Dr. Clara. I need to examine your—" The words died in Clara's throat. The world around her seemed to lose its sound, replaced by a loud, rushing roar in her ears. The face of the woman on the bed was older, heavily wrinkled, and marked by years of stress, but it was a face that had been burned into Clara's memory since she was 7 years old. It was Evelyn, her mother, the woman who had looked at her and her brother as burdens, the woman who had abandoned them in the mud because her father had lost his job. Evelyn opened her pain-filled eyes, squinting through her tears at the young doctor in the pristine white coat. For a long, agonizing moment, there was no recognition, only the desperate plea of a dying patient. But then, as her eyes drifted to the name tag pinned to the coat, Dr. Clara Julian, Evelyn's breath hitched. A look of profound shock and overwhelming shame washed over her pale face. "Clara?" Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling, a mix of agony and disbelief. Is that you?" Clara froze. The stethoscope in her hand felt suddenly like ice. The professional veneer she had spent years building shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. Memories rushed back in an unstoppable torrent. The sound of the rain, the screech of the canvas bag zipper, the cold emptiness of the house the morning after she left, the sight of her brother's bleeding feet from working the docks. Without a single word, Clara stepped back, turned on her heel, and walked out of the room, shutting the door behind her. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps. "Doctor? Is everything okay?" the nurse asked, noticing Clara's sudden pallor. "I cannot take this case," Clara said, her voice dropping to a cold, flat whisper. "Find another resident. I am removing myself from this patient's care." That evening, the beautiful bungalow that usually filled with laughter and warmth was dead silent. Clara had called an emergency family meeting. They sat in the living room, Julian in his comfortable armchair, Leo on the sofa, and Clara pacing the floor, her hands shaking. "It's her," Clara said, her voice thick with suppressed rage. "She's at the hospital. She's dying, Leo. She needs an urgent surgery, and her family doesn't have a single dime to pay for it." Leo sat up straight, his entire body tensing. The successful, composed cybersecurity expert disappeared, replaced for a fraction of a second by the fierce 10-year-old boy who had had to raise his sister. His eyes turned incredibly cold. "Don't do it," Leo said immediately, his voice devoid of any warmth. "Do not touch her. Do not help her. Let her Marcus save her." "Oh wait, they are broke now, right? How ironic." She left a good man because he was broke, only to end up destitute and begging at the feet of the children she abandoned. It's poetic justice. Leo, she was in so much pain. Clara whispered, torn between her medical oath and the deep, throbbing wound in her heart. I don't care about her pain, Clara. Leo stood up, his voice rising in anger. Where was her care when you were crying yourself to sleep? Where was her care when father was coughing blood from working in the cement factories? She vowed never to look back, so why should we? Let her reap what she sowed. If you perform that surgery, you are spitting on everything we suffered through to get here. Clara looked at her father. Julian sat quietly, his eyes fixed on his hands. He looked older now, his face a map of a life that had been incredibly hard, but ultimately redeemed by the love of his children. Father, Clara asked softly, what do you think? Julian took a deep, slow breath. He looked up, his expression unreadable. My children, I have no words of anger left in me, but I will not dictate your conscience. Whatever decision you make, Clara, and whatever support you give her, Leo, I am okay with it. If you choose to walk away, I understand. If you choose to help, I will not stand in your way. You too earned this life. You own your choices. For the next 3 days, Clara pulled away from the case entirely. She requested to be assigned to different wards, actively avoiding the wing where Evelyn lay. But a hospital is an ecosystem of gossip, and secrets have a way of bleeding through the walls. The rumor mill began to churn. It started as a whisper among the nurses, then escalated to the residents. And soon it was common knowledge that the brilliant Dr. Clara is deliberately letting a woman die in room 3 because the woman is her estranged mother. Every time Clara walked down the hallways, she felt the heavy, judgmental weight of her colleagues' stares. She heard the hushed mutters when she entered the break room. How can she call herself a doctor? Regardless of what the mother did, letting someone die out of spite is a violation of the oath. She looks so sweet, but she's actually cold-hearted. The words cut Clara deeply. She tried to justify it to herself. She isn't my mother. She's a stranger who abandoned me. But the moral weight of her inaction began to crush her. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't eat. She had no strong, unshakable reason to help the woman who had neglected her, yet her own conscience was turning into a battlefield. On the 4th morning, Clara received a formal summons to the office of the Chief Medical Director, CMD. The CMD's office was spacious, lined with heavy mahogany bookshelves and certificates of a long, distinguished medical career. Dr. Harrison, a wise, silver-haired man who had overseen Clara's residency since day 1, sat behind his desk. He didn't look angry. He looked profoundly sorrowful. Sit down, Clara, Dr. Harrison said gently, gesturing to the leather chair opposite him. Clara sat, her posture stiff, her defenses completely up. Sir, if this is about the patient in room 3, I have already exercised my right to recuse myself due to a severe conflict of interest. Dr. Harrison sighed, leaning forward and interlocking his fingers. Clara, I am not speaking to you today as your boss or as the administrator of this hospital. I am speaking to you as a man who has practiced medicine for 40 years, and as someone who recognizes that you are one of the finest young doctors I have ever had the privilege to train. He paused, letting his words settle. I know the story, Clara. I know what that woman did to you, your brother, and your father. I know she abandoned you in the absolute worst moment of your lives. Your anger is entirely justified. Your pain is real, and it is deep. Clara felt a tear slip down her cheek, but she quickly wiped it away, her jaw tightening. But let me ask you something, Dr. Harrison continued, his voice calm and incredibly soothing. Are you going to let her actions from 20 years ago define the kind of doctor and the kind of person you are today? If you let her die on that bed out of resentment, you are letting her win. You are allowing her past cruelty to transform you into someone who pays back evil with evil. She doesn't deserve my mercy, sir, Clara choked out, her voice cracking. She doesn't deserve to be saved by the very hands she pushed away. None of us deserve mercy, Clara. That's why it's called mercy, Dr. Harrison said softly. Think about what people are saying out there. More importantly, think about what people will say if that woman dies under our roof while you look the other way. They won't remember her abandonment. They will only remember a doctor who let her mother die out of vengeance. Your pristine career, your reputation, your future, is it worth sacrificing all of it just to feed a grudge? He stood up, walked around the desk, and placed a fatherly hand on her trembling shoulder. Don't let her ghost destroy the beautiful life you and your brother worked so hard to build. Break the cycle, Clara. Show her that the family she abandoned grew up to be infinitely better, kinder, and greater than she ever was. The dam broke. Clara covered her face with her hands and began to sob. A long, deep, silent release of 2 decades of accumulated grief, anger, and betrayal. Dr. Harrison stood by her side, patting her shoulder with quiet comfort, letting the tears wash away the bitterness. After what felt like an eternity, Clara wiped her face, took a deep breath, and stood up. Her eyes were clear. "Thank you, sir. I need to go home for an hour." "Go," Dr. Harrison smiled. "The theater will be ready when you return." Clara drove home in a daze. As soon as she walked through the front door, she called Leo, asking him to meet her and their father in the living room immediately. Leo, sensing the absolute urgency in her voice, left his corporate office and arrived within 20 minutes. When they were all gathered, Clara stood before them. Her eyes were red, but her voice was unshakable. "Leo," she began, looking directly at her brother. "I need you to let me do this. I need you to help me save her." Leo slammed his hand on the armrest, standing up. "Clara, we talked about this. Did you forget what she did?" "I haven't forgotten anything, Leo," Clara cried out, her tears falling freely now. "I remember every single day of it. But the hospital is filled with rumors. People are calling me a monster. They are saying I am watching my mother die out of spite. My career, everything you sacrificed your education for, is on the line. If she dies, that dark cloud will follow me for the rest of my life. My reputation will be ruined." Leo froze, his anger suddenly short-circuiting. The thought of his sister's career or happiness being tarnished was something he could not tolerate. But more than that, Clara continued, stepping closer to him and taking his hands in hers. "I don't want to be like her. She left us because she couldn't handle suffering, because she lacked love and compassion. If I let her die when I have the power to save her, I am no different from her. I am choosing coldness over humanity. Leo, you gave up your life so I could save lives. Let me save hers. Not because she deserves it, but because we are better than the hurt she caused us." Leo looked into his sister's eyes. He saw the little girl he used to shield from the rain, now grown into a powerful, compassionate woman who possessed a strength that surpassed his own. His heart softened. The armor of bitterness he had worn for 20 years began to crack. He looked at his father, who gave him a slow, encouraging nod. Leo let out a long, defeated sigh, his shoulders dropping. He pulled Clara into a tight embrace. "I hate what she did to us," he whispered into her hair. "But I love you more. I never want anything to hurt you or ruin what you've built. If you believe this is the right thing to do, then let's go do it." By the time the family arrived at the teaching hospital, the sun had already dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in deep shades of purple and twilight. They walked with purpose. Clara led the way, flanked by her father and brother. They headed straight for the administrative wing to meet the CMD, who had already bypassed the financial hurdles by authorizing the use of the hospital's emergency charity fund, supplemented by a generous contribution Leo insisted on making at the billing desk. "Everything is set," Dr. Harrison told them, handing Clara the finalized surgical chart. "The surgical team is scrubbed in. You are the lead assistant, Clara. Show them what you're made of." Clara gave a resounding nod and marched out of the CMD's office. The preparation for the surgery was intense and swift. Clara changed into her sterile scrubs, tied her hair back, and pulled on her surgical gloves. When she walked into the operating theater, the bright, sterile lights overhead illuminated the sedated, frail form of Evelyn on the table. This time, Clara felt no hesitation. The personal trauma was locked outside the heavy double doors of the theater. Inside this room, she was purely an instrument of healing. The surgery was complex due to the advanced stage of the perforation, but as the chart had indicated, it was procedurally straightforward for a team of this caliber. For 3 hours, Clara's hands were steady. She worked with absolute precision, suturing the damaged tissue, irrigating the infected abdominal cavity, and ensuring every vitals monitor remained stable. Near midnight, the final stitch was placed. "Excellent work, Dr. Clara," the lead surgeon said, stepping back and removing his mask. "You handled that with incredible grace under pressure. The patient is stable. She's going to make a full recovery." Clara stepped out of the theater, exhausted but filled with a profound, light peace she hadn't felt in decades. In the waiting room, Leo and Julian were waiting. When Clara gave them a tired smile and a nod, Julian closed his eyes in a silent prayer of thanksgiving, and Leo let out a breath he felt he'd been holding for days. 3 days later, Evelyn was moved to a private recovery room. The anesthesia had fully worn off, and her strength was slowly returning. One afternoon, the door to her room opened. Evelyn looked up, expecting a nurse, but instead, she saw an entire family walked in. Clara, dressed in her civilian clothes, walked beside Julian, who moved with a slow but dignified stride. Behind them came Leo, tall, successful, and imposing. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. She looked at the husband she had abandoned, now looking healthy, well-dressed, and serene. She looked at her son, a man of obvious stature and success. She looked at her daughter, the very doctor who had pulled her back from the brink of death. The weight of her past choices crushed her completely. Tears poured down her hollow cheeks, and she began to sob uncontrollably, her frail frame shaking against the hospital bed. Julian, Leo, Clara, she wept, covering her face with her thin hands. I am so sorry. I am so deeply, deeply sorry. Please, forgive me. I never knew. I never knew life would treat me this way. When Marcus's business failed and he became abusive, I realized what a horrible mistake I had made. I thought I was doing the right thing for myself when I left you all, but I learned my lesson the hard way. I lived in poverty, in regret, in absolute shame. She reached out her trembling hands toward them, not daring to touch them. I don't deserve your kindness. I know I don't, but I will spend the rest of my life, however much time I have left, begging for your forgiveness. I have learned my lesson. Please. The room was silent for a long moment, save for Evelyn's ragged sobs. Julian was the first to step forward. He reached out and gently took one of her shaking hands. Evelyn, he said, his voice soft, free of any malice. The anger left me a long time ago. We suffered, yes, but look at what we became. I have forgiven you. Clara stepped up next, placing a hand on her father's shoulder. I saved your life because it was my duty as a doctor, but I forgive you because I choose peace over bitterness. You are forgiven, Mother. Finally, Evelyn looked at Leo. He stood at the foot of the bed, his expression stern but no longer cold. He looked at his mother's broken state, and the remaining embers of his 20-year resentment finally died out. We built a great life without you, Leo said quietly. But we won't hold the past against you anymore. Live your life in peace. We forgive you. 3 weeks later, Evelyn was officially discharged from the hospital. Though she returned to live with her own extended relatives, Julian, Leo, and Clara insisted on bringing her to their home first for a proper celebratory lunch to mark her full recovery. When the car pulled up to the driveway of the beautiful, sprawling suburban bungalow, Evelyn stepped out and froze. She stared at the lush green lawn, the beautiful architecture, and the palpable aura of peace and wealth that surrounded the property. As she walked through the front door and saw the beautifully furnished living room, the walls adorned with pictures of Leo's corporate achievements and Clara's medical milestones, she collapsed onto her knees right there in the hallway. She wept bitterly, the tears a mixture of profound regret for what she had missed out on, and immense gratitude for the unbelievable grace these three souls had extended to her. Julian and Clara gently lifted her up, comforting her, assuring her that the storm was truly over. 3 months passed, and the hospital corridors completely changed their tune. The gossip of malice was entirely replaced by an atmosphere of profound admiration. Clara's exceptional handling of the high-profile, emotionally charged emergency surgery, combined with her unyielding professionalism and her commitment to patient care regardless of personal history, had caught the highest levels of hospital administration by surprise. On a bright morning, a grand presentation was held in the hospital's main auditorium. Before a massive crowd of her peers, seniors, and nurses, Dr. Harrison stepped up to the podium. Today, we honor a physician who embodies the absolute highest ideals of our noble profession, Dr. Harrison announced, his voice echoing proudly. A doctor who demonstrated that medicine is not just about clinical skill, but about extraordinary character, profound empathy, and the courage to choose mercy over personal pain. It is my distinct honor to announce the immediate promotion of Dr. Clara Julian to the position of Chief Resident of the Surgical Department. The auditorium erupted into a thunderous, standing ovation. Clara walked up to the stage, her heart bursting with joy, her eyes scanning the crowd. Sitting in the front row, clapping with unbridled pride, were her father and her brother. As she accepted the promotion plaque, Clara looked out at them and smiled. The journey had been long, the night had been dark, and the poverty had been deep. But they had not just survived, they had conquered. And they had done so not by hardening their hearts, but by allowing the light of sacrifice, love, and ultimate forgiveness to guide them home. If you find this story meaningful, kindly like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more stories updates. Also, what lesson did you learn from this story? We would like to know in the comments. Thank you for watching.